I read your newsletter, and people who are clients of Stevens get your newsletter, or friends of Mary get your newsletter. And you took the position I did, which is American politics is funny. There is no winner yet, though Donald Trump is the prohibitive favorite. Do you think the Chinese have decided Donald Trump is the favorite, or are they watching closely?
It's funny. I hear a lot of commentary about what Beijing may or may not want, but there is one thing that we know for sure, is that they don't want someone who insists on fairness and reciprocity in the relationship, that imposes consequences when they behave badly. And of the three, two out of the three would do that, Trump and Haley. Biden clearly has not.
And will not. I do not believe. In fact, would you summarize Joe Biden's policy towards China since at least the meeting in San Francisco?
Well, I think it's unfortunately slid back towards a very dovish policy, one of appeasement. It's based on strategic dialogue in the hope that somehow their behavior will change if we speak nicely to him. But I'll tell you what, Hugh, my clients get the joke. Capital has fled China at an incredible pace. Hong Kong Stock Exchange is one of the worst performing exchanges this year. When you don't have a rule of law, when your people can't operate safely in country, when they're taking your intellectual property, we now get the joke. And so many companies, large, medium, and small, are getting out, as well as the sort of hot money investors. And that's a good thing. I think that's a permanent change in behavior. I don't think that's going to be reversed. And I think the bipartisanship in Congress still remains. And so what I'm telling people is, look, I'm not going to tell you how to run your business, but the risk profile in China is not going to change. And so you're either going to reduce risk now or you're going to be forced to do it later.
Before I go back to your newsletter, I want to read something from John Ellis in his news items this morning. China's $6 trillion stock market rout reveals a painful truth for President Xi Jinping's government. People are hopelessly gloomy about the outlook for the world's second largest economy, and their pessimism is becoming increasingly hard to ignore. This month's heavy sell off in China's benchmark CSI 300 index brings this plunge to a brutal 40% over the past 3 years. How come nobody knows this, Mary Kissel?
Well, because the average US retail investor can't invest in the mainland Chinese stock markets. There are quotas that were set up by Beijing many decades ago, and they're doled out to certain banks that are in favor, and then those banks can then offer that access to their clients. Recall too, Hugh, this isn't a normal stock market. There aren't independent third-party monitors or free press investment newsletters there, and Chinese people cannot put their money wherever they want to put it. They're very limited. They can put it in property, or they can put it in what is basically a casino, which is the mainland stock market. So Xi Jinping has made this all worse by taking state control over some of their more innovative industries, tech and other major industries. But you can't really compare the mainland Chinese stock market to the New York Stock Exchange. It's two very different things.
They've had a rolling collapse. 40% in 3 years is a huge write down. How come we haven't felt that in the United States where our market is doing well? Are people pulling their money out of China and putting it into the Dow Jones and the NASDAQ?
Yeah, well, there are a couple of factors there. The first is the massive monetary stimulus that the Fed engaged in, just pumping money into our economy. And the second is the massive fiscal expansion that the Biden administration and the Trump administration to some degree embarked upon post-COVID. And so our consumer has just kept spending, and now they're spending on credit cards, and that's keeping the economy afloat. The other issue, as you kind of allude to, Hugh, is that we're kind of the best of the worst. You don't want to put money in China anymore. Europe, it's on its knees. They had a massive inflationary shock to the degree that we did not have because we're not dependent on Russian energy. They're now getting over that a bit, but they're no growth engine. And so by default, we are the place that people are coming to invest their money. And that's lucky, but it would be a heck of a lot better, Hugh, if we could improve the investment environment, take the SEC off the backs of companies. Gary Gensler has just gone on a jihad against capital formation. Remove the CFPB from the equation as just somebody that really legislates by litigation. Get rid of all of this stuff and let Americans do what they're best at, which is, innovate, experiment, fail, get up, try again. That's our system. We're very, very good at. We're an incredibly dynamic economy, but we could be a lot more dynamic. You could see lower inflation, more jobs, and better growth with a better policy profile. And that's really the debate that we're going to have in the presidential election: is what policy basket do we want? What future do we want? That's what we're really debating.
You point out in your newsletter, Mary, that former President Trump is campaigning on a 10% tariff on everything from everywhere. Ambassador Haley has not articulated a tariff policy yet. I just finished interviewing yesterday. Karl Rove was in town, and I did the Q&A, and I read his book, The Triumph of William McKinley, back in the days when the Republican Party was the pro-tariff party. That changed under Reagan. It changed under the last 20 years. Do you see it changing back to being pro-tariff?
It's amazing that we're having this debate, although I think it's a very necessary debate. What President Trump realized in his first term is that he needed a big stick to get Beijing to come to the table and change its behavior, and that was tariffs. And the Biden administration kept those tariffs in place. The second realization was that manufacturing in America had been hollowed out. There are a lot of people suffering. And so, how do you fix that? How do you attract capital back to the US? How do you get manufacturing, of the type that we used to do, back so that we're not dependent on our enemies? And so that was another reason given for those tariffs: stop the foreign goods from coming in so that companies are forced to make it here. The challenge with that, the problem with that, is that it's a 10% tax on everything, and it's not the same world that we lived in 100 years ago. Things are much more globalized, and I don't mean just from China, but also from friends like, for instance, Mexico and Canada and the European Union. And so there's a great intellectual debate going on within the Republican Party about, hey, how do we do this? Do we give handouts to companies? The Trump administration, we in the State Department did that for certain semiconductor companies to bring them to make fabs in Arizona. Cost a lot of money. I don't like that. I don't like government handouts. I think they're often wasteful and misdirected. But that was what we chose to do because we felt like it was an emergency. Is there a better way to do it? Is there a suite of tax incentives or other measures that states or the federal government could take, or even private companies in concert with each other, right, to come and to bring that manufacturing back? And so it's a complex question, Hugh. I don't think it's about, hey, are tariffs good, tariffs bad? I was taught that tariffs were bad because they're a tax. But on the other hand, we're living in a world where we outsource our manufacturing to an enemy. So now we need to reconfigure these supply chains in our thinking. It's a very, very tough question.
Oh, and I'm much older than you, and I grew up in free trade heaven, right? Ronald Reagan was free trade heaven, and we wanted no tariffs. But then I read the Rove book on McKinley, and McKinley campaigned on tariffs protecting working people, and that if you had a tariff, you would build a factory in the United States. It's an interesting dilemma. I do not know that Nikki Haley is going to engage on this. The president has. If they did, who ought they to talk to in terms of making a tariff policy smart for the 21st century? Because the 10% tariff on everything hits friends like Israel and enemies like China. It's a blunt instrument.
Yeah, it is a blunt instrument, and it's also a tax on those poor Americans because let's recall, it's not just the elites in America that buy imported goods. It's a lot of poor and working class Americans who are shopping at, Walmart because that's where the goods come from. So we should be very clear about that. I also, Hugh, would stop maybe focusing only on the punitive measures and focus on the positive measures that we can take. I mean, look at the examples of Hong Kong and Singapore in the 70s and the 80s when they unilaterally dropped their trade restrictions, when they imposed an incredibly efficient tax regime. It was a flat tax in Hong Kong. You paid it once a year. Everybody paid it. But it also attracted a lot of capital in that developed what essentially is a pile of rocks in the South China Sea to one of the most richest and prosperous places in the world. And so I think it needs to be a fuller, more nuanced and comprehensive debate. Nikki Haley has talked about trade with friends. President Trump has talked about that too. Who would I ask? My first trip, I'd go to Britain, Australia, Canada, Mexico, our neighbors, and say, hey guys, what can we do together? I mean, Britain is what, the fifth largest economy in the world? It's a powerhouse. It might geographically be a small place, but there's a lot that we can do together, and we're complementary economies. Take advantage of that.
Mary Kissel is Senior Policy Advisor at Stevens. Follow her on X at Mary Kissel. Very easy to do. and I appreciate getting your newsletter, Mary. Thank you so much.